Harold Jenkins sat in the back of the police car with his hands cuffed behind him. At 72 years old, his wrists hurt from the tight metal cuffs. The old man looked out the window as the police car drove through the quiet streets of Millfield. It was almost midnight, and the small town was asleep. Officer Wilson drove while his partner, Officer Reynolds, kept looking back at Harold through the cage that separated the front and back seats. They had found the old black man near the town's water reservoir, a place that was off-limits after dark. When they spotted his old pickup truck parked on the dirt road, they immediately thought something was wrong. "What's an old guy doing out here this late?" Officer Wilson had said when they first saw the truck. "Nothing good, that's for sure." When they found Harold walking back to his truck carrying something in his hands, they jumped out with their flashlights pointed at him. "Freeze! Police!" Officer Reynolds had shouted, his hand on his gun. Harold had stopped walking and slowly turned around. He was holding small glass jars filled with water. "Officers, I can explain," he had said calmly. But they didn't want to hear it. They saw an old black man in a restricted area at night. That was all they needed to know. They pushed him against his truck, took the jars, and put handcuffs on him. "Please, I need to make a phone call," Harold had asked politely. "This is important work." "Yeah, sure it is," Officer Wilson had laughed. "You can explain it all at the station." Now, as they pulled into the small police station parking lot, Harold remained quiet and dignified. His short gray hair and neat clothes made him look like someone's kind grandfather, not a criminal. But the officers weren't paying attention to that. Inside the station, they took Harold's fingerprints and photo. The bright flash of the camera made his tired eyes blink. They emptied his pockets and put everything in a plastic bag. His wallet, keys, a small notebook, and a special ID card that neither officer bothered to look at closely. "One phone call," Harold said again. "It's very important. You can call your family in the morning," Officer Reynolds said, leading him to a small holding cell. "It's late, and we're short-staffed." The cell was cold with just a metal bench attached to the wall. Harold sat down slowly, his joints stiff and painful. Through the bars, he could see the officers at their desks, joking and drinking coffee. "What do you think he was doing out there?" Officer Wilson asked his partner. "Probably trying to steal something," Reynolds answered. "Or maybe he's just confused. You know how old people get." Harold heard them but said nothing. He looked at the clock on the wall. 12:15 a.m. He had missed his check-in time. By now, his colleagues would know something was wrong. What the officers didn't know was that Harold Jenkins wasn't just an ordinary old man. The small glass jars they had carelessly tossed into an evidence bag contained proof of something dangerous happening in Millfield. And the ID card they hadn't bothered to examine would have told them exactly who they were dealing with. Harold closed his eyes and waited. He knew what would happen next. In his 30 years of military service and 15 years with the Environmental Protection Agency, he had learned patience. Sometimes the best strategy was to stay quiet and wait. At 12:22 a.m., Officer Wilson's phone rang. He answered it casually, but his relaxed expression quickly changed to concern. He looked at Harold through the cell bars with new eyes. "Yes, sir," the officer said into the phone, his voice suddenly respectful. "Yes, he's here." Harold opened his eyes and met the officer's gaze. The game was about to change. Officer Wilson hung up the phone slowly. His face had turned pale. He looked at his partner with wide eyes. "What's wrong?" Officer Reynolds asked, putting down his coffee cup. "That was Captain Brooks," Wilson said in a low voice. "He just got a call from the FBI. They want to know why we're holding one of their consultants." Reynolds nearly choked on his coffee. "FBI? What are you talking about?" Wilson pointed at Harold in the cell. "Him. Apparently, he's working with them on some kind of investigation." Both officers turned to look at Harold, who sat calmly on the bench. He hadn't moved, but there was now the smallest hint of a smile on his face. "Captain says to treat him with respect, and that people are coming," Wilson added. Important people. Reynolds walked quickly to the evidence table and picked up the plastic bag with Harold's belongings. This time, he looked carefully at the ID card they had ignored earlier. His face dropped when he saw the federal government seal and the words Environmental Protection Agency, Special Consultant, printed next to Harold's photo. "Oh no," Reynolds whispered. The officers rushed to the cell. Officer Reynolds fumbled with the keys while Wilson stood nervously nearby. "Mr. Jenkins, we owe you an apology," Wilson said as Reynolds opened the cell door. His tone had changed completely from earlier. "There's been a misunderstanding." Harold stood up slowly, rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had been too tight. "No misunderstanding, officer," he said quietly. "You saw exactly what you wanted to see. An old black man where you thought he shouldn't be." The officers couldn't meet his eyes. They knew he was right. "Your belongings are at the desk," Reynolds said. "We'll get them for you right away. And those water samples." "Don't touch those samples," Harold said firmly. "They need to be handled properly. They contain evidence." "Evidence of what?" Wilson asked. Before Harold could answer, they heard cars pulling into the parking lot outside. The sound of several vehicle doors slamming shut echoed through the small station. Harold checked his watch. It had been exactly 30 minutes since his arrest. "That would be my colleagues," he said. The front door of the police station swung open. 3 men and 2 women walked in wearing dark suits and serious expressions. They didn't look like regular FBI agents from TV shows. These people looked like scientists or professionals. The woman in front held up her badge. "Special Agent Diane Carter, FBI Environmental Crimes Division," she said. Her voice was calm but cold. "We're here for Harold Jenkins and the samples he collected." The officers stood frozen as the agents filled the small station. One of them, a tall man with glasses, went straight to Harold. "Are you okay, Al?" he asked, checking Harold over with concerned eyes. "I'm fine, George," Harold replied. "But the samples need to be properly stored. They're over there." He pointed to the evidence table. Agent Carter was now standing in front of Officers Wilson and Reynolds. She wasn't smiling. "You two have a lot of explaining to do," she said. "Do you realize you've interfered with a federal investigation that's been ongoing for 6 months? Do you understand the seriousness of that?" The officers looked at each other nervously. Outside, more cars were arriving. Through the window, they could see vans with satellite dishes and people with cameras. The local TV news had somehow heard that something big was happening at the Millfield police station. Harold walked over to the evidence table with George and began carefully examining the water samples. Even after 30 years of retirement from the military and 15 years working for the EPA, he was still sharp and focused. "It's all here," he said. "Everything we need to prove what that factory has been doing to the town's water supply." Agent Carter nodded. "Good work, Harold." She turned back to the officers. "And now, gentlemen, we need to talk about how your police department handles arrests and evidence." The night was far from over, and for Officers Wilson and Reynolds, it was about to become the longest shift of their careers. The small police station was now full of people. FBI agents in suits moved around quickly, setting up laptops and equipment. They turned the meeting room into a command center in less than 10 minutes. Through the windows, more news vans had parked outside, and reporters stood with cameras pointed at the building. Chief Parker had arrived, called from his bed at home. He was a big man with a red face that was now even redder from anger and embarrassment. He pulled Officers Wilson and Reynolds into his office and closed the door. Even through the closed door, everyone could hear him yelling. Harold sat at a desk while a woman in a lab coat carefully examined the water samples he had collected. She wore gloves and used special tools to test the water. "The chemicals are definitely there," she told Agent Carter. "High levels of industrial waste. This is dangerous stuff." Agent Carter nodded and turned to Harold. "We need to know exactly where you found each sample." Harold took out a small notebook from his pocket and opened it to a hand-drawn map. "I marked each spot with GPS coordinates," he said. The worst contamination is here, just below the factory's drainage pipe. He pointed to a spot on his map. Meanwhile, in the chief's office, Officer Wilson tried to explain what had happened. "Sir, we found him at the reservoir after hours," Wilson said. "We thought he was trespassing. We had no idea he was working with the FBI." Chief Parker slammed his hand on the desk. "Did you check his ID? Did you listen when he tried to explain? Did you even give him his phone call when he asked for it?" The officers looked at the floor. They had done none of those things. "Do you know who Harold Jenkins is?" the chief asked, his voice lower now, but still angry. The officers shook their heads. "He's not just some consultant," Chief Parker said. "He's a decorated war hero. Served 30 years in the military. Earned the Silver Star in Vietnam. Then worked for the EPA for 15 more years. He lives just outside town and has been respected in this community longer than you two have been alive." Reynolds felt sick to his stomach. They had treated this man like a common criminal. "And now," the chief continued, "we have the FBI, the EPA, and news reporters all over our station because you two couldn't be bothered to do proper police work." Outside the office, Harold was showing George and Agent Carter photos on his phone. "I've been tracking this for 3 months," he explained. "First, I noticed dead fish in the creek downstream from the factory. Then birds started getting sick. I reported it to the local authorities, but nothing happened." "Because the factory owner is the mayor's brother-in-law," George said. Harold nodded. "So I contacted you folks at the Environmental Crimes Division." Agent Carter looked through the photos. They showed dead fish, strange colored water, and pipes dumping something into the creek at night. "These are very good, Harold," she said. "Clear evidence of nighttime dumping when they thought nobody was watching." The lab technician interrupted them. "The tests confirm it," she said urgently. "These chemicals match exactly what's used in the factory's manufacturing process, and the levels are 10 times higher than legal limits." Agent Carter stood up. "That's all we need. Let's get the warrant now." She picked up her phone and walked to a quiet corner to make a call. Harold watched as more FBI agents entered the station with boxes of equipment. They were preparing for something big. The door to the chief's office opened, and Officers Wilson and Reynolds walked out looking like scolded schoolboys. They glanced at Harold but couldn't meet his eyes. Chief Parker came out behind them and walked straight to Agent Carter. "Whatever you need, the Millfield Police Department is at your service," he said formally. Outside, a large black van pulled up. The side door opened and more agents stepped out with what looked like raid gear, bulletproof vests, and equipment. Something big was about to happen in the small town of Millfield, and it had all started because 2 officers arrested the wrong old man. The phone in the police station rang loudly. Chief Parker answered it, and his face turned serious as he listened. After a short talk, he hung up and turned to Agent Carter. "That was Mayor Williams," he said. "He wants to know why there are FBI agents and news vans at the police station at 2 in the morning." Agent Carter smiled slightly. "Perfect timing. Tell him to come down here right away. He should be part of this conversation." Harold watched from his seat as the station buzzed with activity. The truth was coming out now, and nothing could stop it. He thought about his neighbors, about the children who swam the creek during summer, about the families who drank the town's water. For 3 months, he had collected proof of the factory's crimes, and tonight, it would all pay off. "Harold," George called from across the room. "Come look at this." Harold walked over to a laptop where George was studying a map of the town. The map showed the water system with red dots marking where Harold had taken his samples. "If we add your data to what we already have," George said, "we can prove the contamination reaches all the way to the elementary school's water supply." Harold's face darkened. "Those poor kids," he said. "Some of them have been getting sick. The doctors called it a virus, but I knew something wasn't right." Officer Reynolds was standing nearby, listening. He stepped forward with a troubled look. "My daughter goes to that school," he said quietly. She's been having stomachaches for weeks. Harold looked at the young officer with sad eyes. That's why this work matters, he said. That's why I was out there tonight. Reynolds nodded slowly, understanding for the first time the importance of what Harold had been doing. The front door of the station opened, and Mayor Williams walked in. He was a short man wearing an expensive coat over his pajamas. His face was red with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded loudly. "Chief Parker, why are all these people here?" Before the chief could answer, Agent Carter stepped forward. "Mayor Williams, I'm Special Agent Diane Carter with the FBI Environmental Crimes Division. We're investigating illegal chemical dumping at the Millfield manufacturing plant." The mayor's angry look changed to worry for just a second, then back to anger. "That's ridiculous," he said. "The plant follows all regulations. This is harassment." "We have proof," Carter said calmly. She pointed to the lab technician who was still testing Harold's water samples. These samples showed dangerous levels of chemicals being dumped into the town's water system. "And who collected these so-called samples?" the mayor asked. Harold stood up. "I did." Mayor Williams looked at Harold with surprise, then tried to laugh. "This old man, and we're supposed to trust his word." Chief Parker stepped forward. "That old man is Harold Jenkins," he said firmly. "Former Army Master Surgeon with 30 years of service and 15 years at the EPA. And yes, we trust his word." The mayor's face changed as he realized who Harold was. Many people in town knew of Harold's reputation, but the mayor had never met him personally. Agent Carter held up a paper. "We have a federal warrant to search the factory and all its records. Teams are on their way there now." As if on cue, everyone could hear sirens outside as police cars and more FBI vehicles raced through town toward the factory. The mayor's phone rang. His hands shook as he answered it. "Yes." "What?" His face turned pale. "I'll be right there." He hung up and looked around the room with panicked eyes. "Excuse me," he said quickly. "I need to go." "Actually, Mayor Williams," Agent Carter said, stepping in front of him, "we have some questions for you too. About your brother-in-law's factory, and why local complaints about water contamination were ignored." The mayor looked trapped. Outside, camera flashes lit up the windows as reporters took pictures of everything happening at the station. Harold watched it all with a calm face. Justice was coming to Millfield, one drop at a time. The next few hours at the police station were busy and tense. Mayor Williams sat in a chair looking worried as Agent Carter asked him many questions. 2 FBI agents wrote down everything he said. The mayor's lawyer had arrived, but he couldn't help much. The evidence against the factory was too strong. Meanwhile, Harold sat with George and the lab technician as they went through all the water samples. Harold's careful work over 3 months had paid off. Each sample was labeled with the date, time, and exact location. He had even taken pictures of the water when he collected it. "This is perfect work, Harold," George said with respect in his voice. "We couldn't have done better ourselves." Harold smiled a little. 30 years in the military teaches you to be thorough," he said, "and 15 years at the EPA taught me how to catch polluters." Officer Reynolds brought Harold a cup of coffee. It was a small thing, but it was his way of saying sorry. Harold accepted it with a nod. "Mr. Jenkins," Reynolds said quietly, "I want to apologize for how we treated you tonight. We were wrong." Harold looked at the young officer. "You know what the worst part was?" he asked. "It wasn't the handcuffs or the cell. It was that you didn't even listen when I tried to explain. You had already decided who I was before I said a word." Reynolds looked down at his shoes, his face red with shame. "You're right," he admitted, "and I'm truly sorry." Across the room, Chief Parker was on the phone with someone from the FBI office in the big city. When he hung up, he walked over to Harold. "Mr. Jenkins," the chief said formally, "I want to apologize on behalf of the entire Millfield Police Department. The way you were treated tonight was unacceptable. I promise you there will be changes in how we do things. Harold shook the chief's hand. Make sure those changes stick, Chief, he said, not just when the FBI is watching. At that moment, Agent Carter's phone rang. She listened, then gave a thumbs up to the room. The teams at the factory found exactly what we were looking for, she announced. Hidden pipes releasing chemicals directly into the creek. They also found workers destroying documents, but we stopped them in time. A cheer went up from the FBI agents. Months of investigation were finally getting results. The mayor put his head in his hands. His brother-in-law, the factory owner, had just been arrested. And based on the questions Agent Carter was asking, the mayor himself might be next. He had ignored complaints about the water and had helped cover up the problems. Outside, the sun was starting to rise. Harold walked to the window and looked out at the new day. He felt tired but satisfied. At 72 years old, he had just helped crack one of the biggest environmental crimes in the state's history. Officer Wilson approached Harold nervously. "Sir," he said, "I heard you live just outside town. When all this is done, would you like a ride home?" Harold looked at the officer who had arrested him just hours ago. "That would be fine," he said. "But first, I want to go to the factory. I want to see them shut it down." Agent Carter overheard and smiled. "I think we can arrange that, Harold. In fact, I think you deserve to be there when we put the handcuffs on the factory owner." As if on cue, the police station door opened, and several FBI agents walked in with a man in handcuffs. It was Richard Collins, the factory owner and the mayor's brother-in-law. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his face was angry. When he saw the mayor sitting with FBI agents, his anger turned to fear. "Tom, what's happening?" Collins asked the mayor. "Did you call our lawyer?" Before the mayor could answer, Collins noticed Harold standing by the window. "Who's that old man?" he asked. "What's he doing here?" Harold stepped forward. "I'm the old man who caught you poisoning our town," he said in a clear, strong voice. "And I'm just getting started." Richard Collins stared at Harold with angry eyes. You're behind all this?" he asked in disbelief. He couldn't understand how this elderly man had brought down his factory. "Mr. Collins," Agent Carter said firmly, "you're being charged with illegal dumping of toxic chemicals, endangering public health, and destroying evidence. These are serious federal crimes." Collins looked frantically at Mayor Williams. "Tom, do something. You promised me protection." The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at the mayor, whose face had turned white. The FBI agents wrote down every word. "Did the mayor promise to protect you from environmental investigations?" Agent Carter asked, her voice sharp and clear. Collins realized his mistake too late. He had just connected the mayor directly to his crimes. His lawyer, who had just arrived, put a hand on his arm to silence him. "My client has no further comments," the lawyer said. But the damage was done. Another FBI agent stepped toward the mayor. "Mayor Williams, we need to continue our discussion in a more formal setting." As the mayor was led to an interview room, Harold watched with a calm face. He had known all along that the corruption went beyond just the factory. The mayor had helped cover up the pollution that was making people sick. Officer Reynolds approached Harold again. "The chief wants to know if you'd like to go to the factory now. The FBI teams are finishing their work there." Harold nodded. "Yes, I'd like that." Outside, the morning sun was bright. News crews filmed as Harold walked to a police car with Officer Reynolds. People from town had gathered to watch. Some recognized Harold and pointed. "That's Harold Jenkins," one older woman said. "He used to work for the government. My husband served with him in Vietnam." As the police car drove through town, Harold looked out the window at the people on the sidewalks. Many were taking pictures with their phones. The small town of Millfield had never seen anything like this before. "Mr. Jenkins," Officer Reynolds said as he drove, "can I ask you something?" "Go ahead," Harold replied. "How did you know what the factory was doing? What made you start checking the water?" Harold was quiet for a moment. I moved here after my wife died 5 years ago, he finally said. I needed a quiet place, but I noticed the water tasted strange sometimes. Then I saw dead fish in the creek behind my house. Too many to be normal. He looked out the window before continuing. Nobody would listen when I reported it, so I decided to collect proof they couldn't ignore. They arrived at the factory, where FBI agents in special suits were bringing out boxes and containers. Yellow tape surrounded the building with the words "Curai me seen" printed on it. Agent Carter met them at the entrance. "Harold, we found their secret records," she said excitedly. "They'd been dumping chemicals at night for almost 2 years. They knew exactly what they were doing." She led Harold and Officer Reynolds inside to a small office where George was looking through computer files. "Look at this, Harold," George said, pointing to the screen. They kept records of how much money they saved by dumping the waste illegally instead of treating it properly. Over $2 million. Harold shook his head sadly. All that money, while kids got sick from their water. Agent Carter put a hand on Harold's shoulder. "Thanks to you, they're going to pay for what they did. Both with prison time and with money. The EPA will make them clean up every drop they spilled." As they walked through the factory, Harold saw the machines that had made the chemicals. Everything was now shut down and silent. Workers stood outside, worried about their jobs. Harold turned to Agent Carter. "What will happen to the workers?" Most of them didn't know what the bosses were doing. "We'll talk to them," she assured him. "Those who weren't involved won't be charged. And cleanup will need workers. This factory will be busy for a long time, but making things right instead of making things wrong." Outside, more news vans had arrived. Reporters called Harold's name, wanting to talk to the man who had brought down the corrupt factory and exposed the town's secrets. The next day, Harold's small house was surrounded by news vans. Reporters wanted to talk to the man who had exposed the town's big secret. Harold didn't like all the attention. He was a private man who had spent his life working quietly for his country. "Mr. Jenkins, how does it feel to be a hero?" a young reporter asked when Harold stepped onto his porch. "I'm not a hero," Harold said simply. "I just did what was right. Anyone would do the same. But not everyone would have done the same. Most people would have given up after being ignored by the town officials. Most people wouldn't have spent 3 months collecting water samples and taking pictures. Most people wouldn't have contacted the FBI. Harold's phone rang. It was Agent Carter. "Good morning, Harold," she said. "I have some news for you. The water testing lab worked all night. They found that the chemicals in the water can cause the exact health problems people in town have been having. The stomach problems, skin rashes, breathing issues. It all matches." "I knew it," Harold said. "How bad is it?" "The good news is that it can be cleaned up," Carter replied. "The EPA is already working on a plan. The bad news is that it will take time and money." After the call, Harold made a cup of coffee and sat on his back porch. From there, he could see the creek that ran behind his property. The same creek where he had first noticed the dead fish. He thought about the children who had played in that water, the families who had picnics beside it. There was a knock at his front door. Harold wasn't ready to talk to more reporters, but when he opened the door, he was surprised to see Officer Wilson and Officer Reynolds standing there. They weren't in uniform today. "Mr. Jenkins," Officer Wilson said, looking uncomfortable. "We wanted to come by and apologize again. What we did was wrong." Harold looked at the 2 young officers. "Come in," he said after a moment. "I just made coffee." The 3 men sat in Harold's living room. The walls were covered with photos and medals from Harold's military career and his time at the EPA. The officers looked at the pictures with new respect. "I've lived in this town for 5 years," Harold said as he poured coffee. "In all that time, no police officer has ever stopped by my house, until today." The officers looked embarrassed. "We didn't know who you were," Reynolds said. "That's the problem," Harold replied. "You didn't try to know. You saw an old black man and made up your minds about who I was and what I was doing." The officers couldn't argue with that. They knew he was right. What can we do to make it right? Wilson asked. Harold thought for a moment. Learn from it, he said. Treat everyone with respect, no matter what they look like or how old they are. Listen before you judge. As they talked, Harold's phone rang again. It was Agent Carter. Harold, there's something you should know, she said. The mayor just confessed. He admitted he knew about the dumping for over a year. He took money from Collins to keep it quiet and block any investigations. Harold wasn't surprised. He had suspected the corruption went deep. But that's not why I'm calling, Carter continued. The FBI director just called me. He wants to meet you. And so does the governor. They're coming to Millfield tomorrow to see the situation for themselves. Your work has gotten attention at the highest levels. After the call, Harold told the officers what he had learned. They were shocked at how big this case had become. All this happened because you noticed some dead fish and bad-tasting water, Reynolds said with amazement. Harold shook his head. No, he said. All this happened because people in power thought they could get away with poisoning a town. They thought no one would notice or no one would care enough to stop them. He looked out his window at the news vans still parked on his street. They were wrong. The next morning, Harold woke up early as he always did. Years in the military had made early rising a habit he couldn't break. He made his bed with neat corners, showered, and put on his best clothes, a clean button-up shirt, pressed slacks, and the jacket he had worn to his wife's funeral 5 years ago. Today was important. By 9 o'clock, the small town of Millfield was buzzing with activity. Police cars lined the main street. Men in dark suits with earpieces stood at corners, watching everyone carefully. The FBI director and the governor were coming to town. Harold's doorbell rang at exactly 9:30. Agent Carter stood there with a woman in a suit. Good morning, Harold, Carter said with a smile. This is Agent Lisa Thomas. She'll drive us to the meeting. The black SUV with tinted windows moved slowly through town. People stopped on the sidewalks to watch it pass. Everyone knew something big was happening. How are you feeling about all this? Agent Carter asked Harold as they drove. A bit much for an old man like me, Harold admitted. I didn't do this for attention. I know, she said. That's why everyone is so impressed. You did it because it was right. They arrived at the town hall where a large crowd had gathered. Police officers kept people back as Harold was escorted inside. The building was normally quiet, but today it was filled with important-looking people in suits. In the main meeting room, Chief Parker stood with the FBI director and the governor. When Harold entered, they all turned to look at him. Mr. Jenkins, the FBI director said, stepping forward to shake Harold's hand. It's an honor to meet you. Your work on this case has been remarkable. The governor also shook Harold's hand. The people of this state owe you a debt of gratitude. Sir, what you uncovered will save lives. Harold felt uncomfortable with all the praise. I just did what needed doing, he said simply. The meeting began with Agent Carter showing maps of the contamination and explaining how Harold had discovered it. The governor asked many questions about how the town water had been affected. The FBI director explained how the case would proceed against the factory owner and the mayor. Both men will face federal charges, the director said. The evidence is overwhelming. Then something unexpected happened. Chief Parker stood up and cleared his throat. There's something else we need to address, he said. The way Mr. Jenkins was treated by my officers when they found him collecting samples. It was unprofessional and wrong. The room went quiet. Harold hadn't expected this. We had an elderly black veteran, a decorated military hero and former EPA investigator, and we treated him like a criminal, the chief continued. We didn't listen to him, didn't check his ID properly, and denied him his right to make a phone call. This is unacceptable. The governor looked surprised. What are you proposing, Chief? A complete review of our arrest procedures and mandatory training on bias for every officer in the department, Chief Parker said firmly, starting with the 2 officers involved. In fact, they're waiting outside and would like to speak to everyone. The door opened, and Officers Wilson and Reynolds walked in. They looked nervous but determined. Reynolds spoke first. "What happened that night was wrong," he said. "We judged Mr. Jenkins by his appearance, not his actions. We've learned from our mistake, and we want to help make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Harold watched with surprise as the young officers outlined a plan they had developed. A community outreach program to build better relationships between police and residents, especially elderly residents and people of color. The FBI director looked impressed. Sometimes, good can come from mistakes if people are willing to learn. Harold caught Officer Reynolds' eye and gave him a small nod of approval. The young man stood a little straighter. Outside, the crowd had grown larger. News cameras were everywhere. What had started with one man's concern about water had become something much bigger for the town of Millfield. 3 months had passed since that night when Harold was arrested at the water reservoir. The small town of Millfield had changed in many ways. The factory was closed, but not empty. Workers in special suits cleaned every inch of the building and the land around it. Large machines pumped and filtered the water in the creek. The EPA had taken over the cleanup project, which would continue for at least 2 more years. Richard Collins, the factory owner, and former Mayor Williams were both in jail waiting for their trials. They faced many years in prison for what they had done to the town's water and for lying about it. A new mayor had been elected, a woman named Sarah Johnson who had been a nurse at the town clinic. She had seen many children with strange illnesses that she now knew came from the bad water. As mayor, her first job was to make sure everyone in town had clean, safe water to drink. On a sunny Saturday morning, Harold sat on a bench in the town park. He watched children playing on the swings and slides. Their parents no longer worried about them getting sick from touching the grass or drinking from water fountains. "Mr. Jenkins." Harold looked up to see Officer Reynolds walking toward him, pushing a little girl on a bicycle with training wheels. The officer was not in uniform today. "Hello, officer," Harold said with a smile. "And who is this young lady?" "This is my daughter, Emma," Reynolds said proudly. "Emma, say hello to Mr. Jenkins. He's the man who fixed our water." The little girl looked at Harold with big eyes. "Hello," she said shyly. "Daddy says you're a hero." Harold laughed softly. "I'm just an old man who noticed something wrong and tried to fix it." Reynolds sat next to Harold on the bench, while Emma rode her bike on the path nearby. "She's feeling much better now," Reynolds said, watching his daughter. "No more stomach problems since the water was fixed." "I'm glad to hear that," Harold replied. They sat quietly for a moment before Reynolds spoke again. "The new training program is going well," he said. "Every officer in the department has completed it. Wilson and I are even helping teach some of the classes now." Harold nodded with approval. "Good. That's very good." Across the park, they saw Officer Wilson arrive with an elderly woman. He was carrying her groceries and walking slowly to match her pace. When he saw Harold and Reynolds, he waved. "That's Mrs. Peterson," Reynolds explained. "She's 85 and lives alone. We check on her each week now as part of our new community program." Harold watched as Wilson helped the old woman to a bench and made sure she was comfortable before leaving. Things really were changing in Millfield. Agent Carter had called Harold yesterday with news. The EPA testing showed the water was getting cleaner every day. The special filters they had installed were working well. Soon, the creek behind Harold's house would be safe again for fish and birds. A group of school children walked by, led by their teacher. When they saw Harold, they waved excitedly. They had learned about him in school, the veteran who saved their town. "Mr. Jenkins," Reynolds said, "there's going to be a ceremony next week. The town council wants to rename the park after you. Will you come?" Harold thought about it. He didn't like being the center of attention, but maybe this one time it would be okay. "I'll be there," he said. As they sat in the warm sunshine, Harold felt at peace. He thought about his long life, his years in the military, his work with the EPA, and now this unexpected final chapter. He had moved to Millfield looking for a quiet place to live out his final years. Instead, he had found a purpose and now a community that respected him. The little girl, Emma, rode by on her bike, laughing with joy. "Look at me, Daddy," she called. Harold Jenkins smiled. This was why it had all been worth it.